Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be making the second type of bread that I make fairly regularly. The first kind of bread was the sandwich loaf that we looked at last week. And there's a link on the screen here to that video if you're interested in watching that one. The bread that we're going to make today, on the other hand, is a more sturdy, crusty, bowl-shaped loaf that's made with 4 simple ingredients. And if you can believe it, requires no kneading, no stand mixer, no fancy gadgets. This bread is chewy and hearty, and it works really well for dipping into soups or chilies. It also works really well for grilled sandwiches, like a Reuben, which is what I'm actually baking this loaf for today. At the end, we'll take a look at the cost to make this loaf, and trust me, you're going to be shocked at how cheap it is. So let's jump in. As with all baking, I prefer to weigh the ingredients as opposed to using measuring cups. It's a lot more accurate. So I'll start by weighing out the flour. I'm using regular all-purpose flour for this, but you could use a stronger flour like bread flour, and that would make it even better. You could also add in some percentage of whole wheat flour or even rye flour. I'm using 500 grams of flour here. Next, I'll weigh out 10 grams of yeast. This is active dry yeast. And then 8 grams of salt. And finally, 420 grams of water. You can try not to spill it all over the counter like I'm doing here. And then that's it. 4 ingredients. It's amazing that these 4 things, when you put them together, turn into the finished product that they do. Now, you want to mix all this really well, making sure there are no dry lumps of flour left in there anywhere. I thought that using this glass bowl would make it easier to see for the video, but it's really too small for this, so I'm going to switch over here to a larger bowl, much better for mixing. Now I'm using here what's called a Danish whisk to mix everything, but it's not a necessary tool. I've made this bread many times just using a wooden spoon to mix everything together, and it works fine. That said, these Danish whisks do work really well for mixing doughs or batters like this. Then once that's all mixed up, I'll cover it with plastic wrap, or you could just put a tea towel over top of the bowl, and I'll put that somewhere warm and undisturbed to let it rise. I like to put mine in the oven with the heat off, but with the oven light turned on. It makes for a great proofing drawer. But you could just leave it on the counter and that would work just fine. You could also put this in the fridge at this stage, where you could leave it overnight or even as long as 20 or 24 hours before it needs to be baked. Okay, now I'm going to bake my bread inside this Dutch oven, which makes for a nice humid environment for the bread to be in, and that helps it to spring up nicely in the oven. If you don't have a Dutch oven like this, I have seen this done just on a cookie sheet with a large metal mixing bowl placed over top. Alternately, you could just bake this on a tray or a baking dish open in the oven, but it won't have quite the same oven spring as doing it in a closed container like this. Now, this dough's been proofing here for 4 to 5 hours at this point. It's looking nice and bubbly, and it's risen up the sides of the bowl. So I'll flour the countertop, and I'll scrape this dough out onto that flour. Now this dough is very wet and sticky to work with. It's quite difficult to work with, and that's the most challenging thing about this recipe. So I'm going to add a fair bit more flour over top of the dough, as well as onto the bench scraper and onto my hands. And then I'm just going to flip this dough and turn it around a few times, making sure that everywhere has a light dusting of flour on it. Now this next step is called pre-shaping, where we bring the dough into as tight a ball as we can. Now you'll see that I sort of scrape the dough from the side and then tuck it under the front, using the fact that it's sort of sticking to the counter a little bit to help add tension to the dough. You can see as I'm doing this that the surface of the dough starts to get tighter and smoother, and the ball is getting taller and rounder. And occasionally you'll get these air bubbles that get trapped in there. That's okay, just pop them, or don't if you want. They make the crust extra crispy if you leave them unpopped. Okay, and then I'll coat the surface here with a bit more flour, followed by some loose plastic wrap, and it's time for the second rise, or what bakers call bench resting. At this point, I put the oven on to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, or 260 Celsius, and I'll also put that cast iron Dutch oven into the oven to preheat. Okay, 45 minutes have now passed, and you can see that the dough has risen and expanded out in all directions. Another dusting of flour onto your hands, and it's time to do the final shaping. This is basically the same process as before, but we're going to try to do a nice, smooth, and even ball here. This will determine the final shape of the bread. Then I get a piece of parchment paper ready here to the side, and then lift and plop the dough into the middle of the parchment, and try not to ruin the nice ball shape that you made. Now this is optional, but I like to put some sesame seeds on this bread, so I'll dampen the surface of the dough with my wet hand, and then just sprinkle the seeds on. You could use poppy seeds, sunflower seeds, whatever you like here. Nothing at all is also a valid choice if that's what you prefer. And then using a sharp knife or a lame, like I'm using here, you'll slash a couple of lines into the dough. This gives a place for steam to escape from the interior of the dough as it's rising and baking. Now this Dutch oven is screaming hot here. We're ready to bake. So the bread goes in, the lid goes on, and into the oven for 40 minutes. Okay, so here we are after 40 minutes. Now I'll turn the oven down to 420 Fahrenheit, 215 Celsius, and I'll remove the lid from the Dutch oven for the last part. And we'll put this back in for a final 8 to 10 minutes. And here it is, fully baked. So I'll move it over to a rack to cool off, and you'll need to leave this for a good hour before you slice into it. You can see the crust on this is really great. It's crunchy, but it's also chewy. And then we'll cut into it here and we'll have a look at the crumb. So it looks pretty good. It's not super open like a sourdough. It's nice and consistent and airy. Nice and even across the whole loaf. And it's soft and springy. So all these things mean that the dough was properly rested and risen. Okay, so let's take a look at the cost behind baking this delicious loaf of bread. The largest cost by far is in the flour. So I'm just using regular store-bought all-purpose flour here. You could definitely use a fancier artisanal flour here, and that would raise the cost. It would probably improve the flavor a little bit, but it's definitely not necessary. This is just regular old flour, and it tastes amazing. So we used 50 cents worth of flour for this loaf, as well as a few cents of yeast and some salt. The water was free, so that brings the total cost for this loaf to 59 cents. Now this loaf at the supermarket would probably be $5, maybe $6, maybe $7, and for sure would be $8 to $10 at a farmer's market or something like that. So 59 cents is really hard to beat. Now in terms of time to prepare, our prep time to measure and mix these ingredients was about 10 minutes, followed by the 2 rounds of proofing and shaping and rising, which altogether took about 5 hours. And finally, a total baking time of around 60 minutes. So that's it, folks. A no-knead bread that really delivers an artisanal country bakery-style loaf. It's about the most delicious thing that you can make with 60 cents worth of ingredients and 6 to 7 hours of your day. Seriously though, most of the time it's not active cooking, so if you do that first rise even overnight in the fridge, then you can sleep through most of the time. If you enjoyed this video or you found it useful, then please do hit the like button. And as this is a new channel, I'd very much appreciate you subscribing so that I can keep bringing you more videos. Thanks. We'll talk soon.